weapons, stunning weapons. These things take out entire buildings and whatever is in those buildings.
All right, I guess we are live on the stream. And let me get a program going here now.
And according to some experts,
all right, we'll get rid of the squeak. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Oh, what happened to my recording? Let me get recording going here. It is the third day of August. Is it the fourth day? It's the fourth day of August, 2026. And you're listening to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I am Jack Stockwell. There it is. And let me get the thing going. All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you here this Tuesday morning. My goodness, just the things that have happened in the last 24 hours. And welcome to the K-Talk crowd. Welcome for those who are coming live on the stream. You can hear this program, of course, through AM 1640 over the radio. You can go to ktalk.com, I think it's just ktalk.com, and click on the homepage there to listen live. So you can listen to it over the K-Talk stream, or you can go to youtube.com slash Global Affairs Unfiltered, I think is what it is, and listen to it through YouTube. The program is being recorded at YouTube and will be available later on. So, where are we? Where are we indeed? Where are we in Utah? Again, the topics I address are the topics involved with those who are pulling the strings. And those who are pulling the strings have a very big effect upon those who are at the end of the strings, which is the general population, you and me. And what happens internationally has a direct effect on what is happening here, even amidst all of the distractions that are taking place. The World Cup is over with now. Now we're moving into the NFL preseason. In a few weeks, we'll be into college football. And who is going to be paying a whole lot of attention to what is going on with world affairs that will be directly affecting, by the time college football starts in September, your food prices, your energy prices, the price you're paying at the pump, the prices you're going to be paying for other things, and the mortgage interest just moved up a few more points, making it more difficult to buy a house. So we are at the behest and the results of international actions that are taking place. What can you do about it? Well, you've got the best government money can buy, and it's a matter of just watching the trends and what is going on in Washington that is going to pretty well direct what's going to happen with you and your life in the next 6 months. And I'm in the same straits as the rest of you. You know, I have plenty of worries I wake up with every morning myself, and they seem to be increasingly worse as far as money's concerned and trends and whatever else that is the natural result of what appears to be a worsening economy. And what is it that controls our economy? Well, it used to be, buy low and sell high. Now it's all of these flexible exchange rates. It's the deals that are going on behind the scenes, like the kind of deals President Trump is doing when he announced, like he announced early yesterday morning, once again on his Air Force One account on X, which I think he calls Rapid Response, that negotiations are going to take place yesterday with Iran finally on a deal. And he did, and what happens? Well, the market immediately responds to that, and it looks better. And for those who were betting on the market increasing over a 24-hour period, they're going to make a lot of money, which some investigators say that Trump and his family are several times richer now than when he went into office 2 years ago, simply because of the comments that he makes on Air Force One. And so he comes out and he says, we've got negotiations that are probably going to work this time with Iran. And he didn't, as I said, he didn't set a deadline. But Iran has again denied that negotiations are scheduled. Iran's response is kind of like, President Trump who? And this is at least President Trump's fifth or sixth act of this kind in which it appears that he's acknowledging Iran's leverage over the economy and in the region. And Trump put it yesterday, he said this could be a deal on Hormuz. I think ultimately he said on the nuclearization. I call it the denuclearization of Iran, which they're still, the battle cry is still, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran doesn't want a nuclear weapon. And it's contrary to their faith. You know that Iran is primarily Shiite. In fact, that's kind of where it began. And that is absolutely contrary to their religious faith. As the previous supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, made very clear from the time of the revolution on, we will not have a nuclear weapon. So Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said that Iran has not planned any meetings in response to President Trump saying we got meetings. Iran says, no, we don't. And we don't have any meetings with America, and we don't have any meetings with any other nations. Araghchi said we're not journeying into other countries and not receiving people here in Iran for discussions in these days. And in fact, Iran later yesterday insisted that Iran and Oman were actually negotiating between them and that a solution, including a new passage through the strait, was reaching its final stage. And according to Bloomberg News, early this morning, which quoted Bagheri, the foreign minister, said, we're not negotiating with the United States of America. Even though President Trump is saying we're negotiating for a new deal. So according to the news agent, the IRNA, Bagheri specified that reaching an understanding with Oman is a necessary condition for the reopening of the Hormuz. But by itself, it wasn't sufficient in and of itself. Because the strait's been closed due to a disagreement in the region, but rather because of the U.S.-Israeli war. It was open to everybody at no cost before the attack began February 28th. Now it's closed. Why is it closed? Because Iran won the war. As of yesterday, President Trump ordered troops to start coming out of Kuwait and out of Bahrain, which is the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet. Why are they leaving? Because they've lost. Now, I'll get into that more in a minute, but as the foreign spokesperson for Iran went on, he said a significant change in the situation in the strait is unlikely. In other words, it's going to remain closed due to the naval blockade of Iran and the military aggression by the U.S. evil acts, as they call them. Iran's negotiating with Oman is unrelated to the reopening or the continued closure of the Strait of Hormuz, he said. So later yesterday, President Trump denounces Iran on his Truth Social site, saying Iranian leadership is incredibly duplicitous. First, they ask for a meeting, some would say beg. Talks begin with more scheduled in the immediate future, and then they openly, and I'm quoting Trump, openly and proudly that they're not having any discussions, that nothing is being talked about, and that they're only dealing with Oman. Oman had no comments to make about yesterday. And Trump continues to repeat the same sequence multiple times, clearly looking for a way out that he can come home with a great victory. And that's his MO. Victory, victory, victory. And when all the evidence indicates that it's not a victory, you shout victory even louder. And then when it looks like you've lost, you still declare the fact that you've had a victory. Because there's a certain percentage of the population that's going to believe that, while the price of living continues to increase. Now, Iran's foreign minister, Agrachi, has been traveling all over the Middle East the last few days. And on Sunday night, he held his second round of calls with the Saudi foreign minister, Faisal bin Farhan, and Pakistani's Army Chief Field Marshal, reviewing the latest diplomatic efforts and initiatives to maintain and strengthen regional security and stability. Now, the Saudis' foreign ministry's own statement said that the two ministers had discussed the situation with Prince Faisal, reaffirming Riyadh's eagerness to continue the regional rounds in establishing security and stability. What's all that stuff mean? They know that their autocracies, their control, essentially dictatorship of their countries, because they're not elected into these positions, will be over with if the United States and Israel attacks full scale against Iran again, because Iran has said not only will they finally be attacking serious targets in Haifa and Tel Aviv, but they will be targeting Riyadh. They will be targeting Saudi desalination plants. That their missile targets go far beyond Israel and U.S. defense positions. That they will be attacking the Gulf Coast countries, all of them. And they will all be history. And remember, in a country as big as Saudi Arabia, that the ruling family has control of, the rest of the country hates them. And the rest of the country would love the opportunity to overthrow their dictatorships. And not just Saudi, but the rest of them, rest of the Arab states, that are all there in the positions that they're in because they have control of the oil fields. And as long as they have control of the oil fields, they have control of the cash flow. And as long as they have control of the cash flow, they can continue to pay the army that keeps them in the position that they're in. But if that cash flow disappears, as Iran has threatened will definitely happen, they don't even have to play an active part in the next attack on Iran by the United States and Israel. The fact that they have supported the United States and Israel up to this point is enough. So that's kind of the situation here. And so I think President Trump, as I was talking about yesterday, I think he's finally getting some good advice. He's finally listening to somebody who's got a head on their shoulders. Don't do it. So there's a significant change in some of the climate involved with this whole area of Southwest Asia. Because Iran negotiating with Oman is significant because Oman has control of the bottom end of the Red Sea. Now, when you look at some of the most significant developments that are going on are all the phone calls that are going on, and this is released in the news by the heads of the Gulf states and Iran. And so when Trump talks about the fact that he's going to attack Iran and obliterate them or bomb them into the Stone Age, or some of the other silly comments he makes, these Gulf countries call up Iran. We're not part of this. We don't want anything to do with this. We don't support this. Please don't bomb us into the Stone Age that Trump says he wants to do to you. You know, that's not exactly what they're saying, but that's the gist of it. Now, that's kind of sitting there right now, trying to decide which way to go. But when I heard through reliable sources that Trump is pulling out of Kuwait, which was the big launching point for the ground invasion, when he's pulling out of Kuwait and he's pulling out of Bahrain, headquarters of the Fifth Fleet, because there's very little left of the headquarters of the Fifth Fleet as far as infrastructure is concerned. And these Gulf coasts are out of defensive missiles. There's no Iron Dome for them. Drones and missiles continue to get through. What are you going to do and still try to get out of there without egg on your face? Now, if that's not enough, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, Europe, Russia hammering each other's grain export hubs, causing damage and blockages on the Danube ports in the Ukraine and on the Black Sea. And now that Russia is closing off Odessa's access to the sea by bombing their ports, Ukraine is essentially becoming a landlocked country. And if the Ukraine can't make money shipping out through the ports in Odessa, this war can't go on much longer. Several experts are estimating the number of cargo ships registered to Russia or carrying Russia cargo are continuing to be hit by the West drones at 200 ships in the month of June alone. Russia now is blocking the port of Odessa, which is the Ukraine's #1 grain exporting outlet, by targeting port and related facilities in and around the city. So, what happened Friday? The futures price of wheat jumped by $4 a bushel to $640 per metric ton. It is nowhere near its highs during the COVID crisis, which ran, in the vicinity of about $1,000 per ton because of existing inventories in many of the exporting countries. But wheat is still in the early stages of a new crisis, as oil was late in July. So at the July 27th UN Security Council meeting on the Ukraine war, the UN Undersecretary at the Security Council saw fit to criticize only Russia's strikes on Kyiv and Odessa. Not a word about Ukraine strikes on Russia. Because a lot of the world depends on Ukrainian wheat getting out of the ports of Odessa into the Black Sea and out to the world. And Russia is closing those down. So it is no surprise that this refugee crisis that occurred in Ceuta and Melilla is causing a lot of uproar and emotional outbursts on all sides. You followed that last weekend, I'm sure, and I talked about it yesterday. Some 50,000 people in Morocco. Morocco has two Spanish enclaves. The Ceuta one and the Melilla. I don't know if it's Melilla or Melilla, whatever. And those compounds were overrun by as many as 50,000 people. And many of them came across the Strait of Gibraltar to the southern tip. Gibraltar is sitting there on the southern part of Spain, as you know, from geography. And what I talked about yesterday to some degree was the elimination of the immigration crisis by development inside these countries from where these people are coming from, so they don't have to leave. And despite the fact that this topic is still going on right now in a lot of the main headlines, I don't think we should, we don't want to be distracted because of the dynamic to an increasing chance of World War III is not primarily there, but it is a fact that these two regional crises, Iran and Ukraine, are for their own reasons reaching the point of exhaustion. That is, a phase change has to occur one way or another because the existing trajectory is coming to an end. Now, I think by Saturday evening or so, Trump had basically announced that the most horrible strikes since the Second World War were going to take place against Iran. And he had called for the evacuation of all U.S. embassies. This just happened Saturday night. And on all U.S. nationals to evacuate because of the coming strike. So just imagine if you, not just an American diplomat, but an American businessman or woman in these foreign countries, where you had moved there to foster your business interests in these countries, and you hear from President Trump, pack and get out now, because the strike we are going to create against Iran is going to be the worst of any strike since World War II. So just imagine you packing your suitcases, running around, trying to evacuate, and then just a few hours later, Trump calls it off and basically says, we're locked and loaded and ready to go against the Islamic Republic of Iran at levels of military terror and strength and power not seen since World War II. And he even used the word terror, military terror, he said. And then he claims, well, I got all these phone calls from leaders of these countries in that region, so I'm calling it off. And that part of the deal would be that Iran would agree to the total opening of the Hormuz Strait and an end to their nuclear policy. Now get this. This is what he's saying Saturday. Get the hell out of there. Because what we're going to do is worse than anything that's happened since World War II. And you hear this, you don't know what to think because you've heard it several times already. But you start packing and getting plane tickets and to get out of there as fast as possible, or to get to the U.S. consulate wherever you're at so that they can get you out of there. Getting your money out of the bank, doing whatever transfers have to be done, gathering whatever you have in your apartment or your house where you've been living for a few months or a year or so. And then just a little bit later, it's all called off. And President's excuse, I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to make this point clear. The president said, well, I talked to Saudi and I talked to UAE and I talked to these other countries and they don't want me to do this. Well, of course they don't want him to do it for the very reason I gave earlier in the program. They're going to be bombed by Iran because Iran told them that. And Iran said, you better stop the United States from doing what they're talking about doing, because we will target you as well. And they know that Iran has such sophisticated missiles and drones, they can't be stopped anymore because the defensive positions are gone. The THAAD levels, the JASSM levels, Tomahawk levels are down to in the scores of numbers where they used to be in the hundreds or thousands. And then all of a sudden, President Trump calls off the attack and says, well, Iran has agreed to the total opening of the Hormuz Strait and the fact that they will not build a nuclear weapon, which has been completely denied by Iran. I mean, why would they believe the United States after they broke any promises, any written memorandums in the middle of diplomatic negotiations? So there was no statement from Iran confirming any of this. There are various reports that there's all kinds of diplomatic activity taking place. Obviously, because several countries were communicating their concerns that if such a strike were to take place, as I've said, what should prevent Iran from destroying the oil refineries infrastructure and other essential things like the desalination facilities in the Gulf cooperation countries? Because one can only assume that would be the natural response from Iran. It's not funny, but when you hear me laugh about stuff like this, it's how I protect my psyche. It's how I protect my mind from these shock waves. See, it's one thing to be knee deep in serious problems, financial, social, family, marriage, whatever else, and that you have some kind of a construct to follow to solve the problem. Refinancing, family counseling, selling off assets, whatever else, you have kind of a target down the road leading you towards to solve what is causing such psychic stress. But when you're dealing with something like this, where the situation changes not day to day, but almost hour to hour, it's a lot harder to deal with. So the foreign minister, Agrachi, speaking to the Pakistani army chief and the Turkish foreign minister and the Saudi foreign minister, basically saying, well, it seems like it's all called off for now. Don't worry about us bombing you into the Stone Age if the U.S. attacks us, because it looks like the U.S. attack is off again. Imagine living under these conditions. As I said, what's occupying America's attention now? Kids are going back to school in a couple weeks. Where can we get the best back to school deals? Major League Baseball is kind of humdrum at the moment. Football's getting ready to go. We got a little break in the heat here in Salt Lake today. Temperatures in the 60s last night. But over there, please, Iran, don't bomb us into the Stone Age. And it's also probable that maybe the Pentagon was saying that the munitions of the United States, after all the shelling and the war and so forth since Ukraine, and now Iran going on for this long period of time, that they're down on munitions reserves, especially in terms of missile defense systems, as I said, such as the Patriot and the THAAD, and that it would leave the United States run down to a dangerous degree. In any case, there were these reports that Trump was fuming, that he was exasperated, and that he was completely feeling in a trap, out of which he could not really see a clear way out, and at the same time be able to sell the American public on a victory in the Middle East. So what does he do now that he always does for the last 6 months in this situation? Start talking about a new round of negotiations and how talks are going to start very soon. And Tehran has denied and basically demanded that Washington should implement the agreed upon memorandum of understanding that came out back in mid-June. And why have they not followed it? Because Israel essentially tore the thing up and flushed it down the toilet. Because Articles 1 and 2 said Israel has to get out of Lebanon and out of Gaza. And Article number 5 said that Iran would have complete control of the Strait of Hormuz. This document, this memorandum of understanding, was essentially what happened in Tokyo Bay with MacArthur on the Missouri, with Japan surrendering. The memorandum of understanding is essentially a surrender document on the part of the United States that Iran won the war. And that's why the document has not been followed, because the U.S. and Western powers, especially Israel, wants this to continue. And when you listen to Ben-Gvir, if you want to know what Israel's position is, don't listen to Netanyahu. Listen to Ben-Gvir, because everything he says is what happens. And he is still one of the primary drives in Israel behind Greater Israel. And they're not about to quit. And they're not about to let the United States back down from a major final attack where Iran is reduced to dust. So Tehran has said, this is nonsense. All this talk, negotiations, all you have to do is follow the memorandum of understanding. And so that's kind of where that stands. So the spokesman of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Baghaei, said the Strait of Hormuz, get this, the Strait of Hormuz will never again be in the condition that it was at the outset of the war. And what condition was it? Wide open to anybody. No costs, no duties, no minefields, nothing. Now, the news service reporting this, the IRNA, they said that the recent discussions with Oman do not mean the reopening of the strait. There are discussions, but they're very, a very concrete framework to guarantee the security of the traffic in the region. Now, that obviously is just going to have consequences, because either Trump just packs it in and gets out, which several experts had advised him repeatedly. This is the only safe, face-saving step. But it's not likely, certainly not guaranteed, that this is going to happen. Or there could be some escalation going into a totally different quality of attack. And that's what's scary. Because they know the missiles that they have cannot hit deep enough in those granite mountains to reach the nuclear facilities. Only one thing can happen to do that: a tactical nuke on top of these areas. They can easily crack through 100 meters of granite. And so Trump is trying to find this off-ramp, as we talk about, but a face-saving step, pulling all armed forces out of the Middle East and still say we won. Now, the ground troops thing is very unlikely, given the fact that this would be associated with massive casualties. And we already know the casualties are far greater, in the hundreds, than what's being reported. But the use of nuclear weapons can't be excluded. So this is a heightened state of tension. It can't continue at this level of tension. Either there is a settling, a going back, leaving the region, but that itself has a whole nest of demands attached to it. Or the only other option is to escalate. And the other area where this exhaustion of certainty, I should say certain directionality, has been reached is obviously coming very close to Ukraine, where, for what it's worth, one of the people that I really like listening to, Larry Johnson, on the Napolitano podcast, but he's on a lot of other podcasts as a guest, basically says, and so are some other podcasters and experts, that given the fact that Russia has started to block Odessa, or to cut Odessa off from the Black Sea, that it would not be necessary for Russia to completely occupy that region, but that it would be sufficient to just cut off Ukraine's access to the Black Sea. Then basically the trade through the Black Sea for Ukraine and everything else would be cut off. And it would basically mean that the coming end of the war is getting closer, because Ukraine could not continue without getting paid for those grain exports coming out of Odessa into the Black Sea. And with the loss of those ports, the Ukrainian economy would simply collapse. And that's the view of Alexander Mercouris, who, again, is another podcaster. Sometimes I listen to him. But nevertheless, he has said some very reasonable things at various points. And therefore, given the fact that we are here at the beginning of August, with the two regional crises definitely reaching a boundary condition in the very near future, and given the fact that these two crises are now being linked, the latest because of the Ukrainian attack on an Iranian vessel in the Caspian Sea. So in general, we know that the much more underlying reasons are the efforts to maintain hegemony by the West as compared to these rising countries in the global South. So we are absolutely here, the first week of August, in the domain of the guns of August. And the change of policy is more urgent now than ever. So Saturday, President Trump tells all the Americans, come home. Diplomats, come home. Get out of there quickly as possible, because we're going to hit them with something that hasn't been seen since World War II. And then a few hours later, he backs down from it. Why? Why did he change his mind? As he has, it's 5 or 6 times now since the ceasefire brought about by the Memorandum of Understanding. Why did he just, forget what I said? Why? Who's getting to him? Who's finally getting through to him? Now, he had a recent meeting with Netanyahu, but Netanyahu isn't going to tell him to pull out of the Middle East. But Netanyahu's got plenty of problems of his own because of the elections that are coming up in Israel, let alone the midterms here. What would President Trump have to do now to maintain Republican control of Congress? Just think about that for a minute. And the kind of representation that Utah has in Congress, with our representatives and our senators voting to combine the U.S. and Israeli military, for crying out loud. But a change of policy is more important now than ever before. How that change is going to come about, other than some sudden reason for diplomacy, I don't know, it's not very likely. But one of the things I tried to talk about yesterday that I thought would sponsor some hope is for the Western nations and the BRICS to jointly say, instead of all this money we're spending on missiles, we're going to develop Africa. We're going to develop the Middle East. We're going to develop the rest of Asia, which certainly needs it. And we're going to develop Latin America. And we're going to develop the poor areas of Europe and the United States, as we have poor areas. Because there's areas which are, even in our country, are bordering on third world conditions. So we stop this whole armament insanity, which is a complete destruction of wealth and economic assets, and we go for joint development. Now that requires an awful lot more than prayer. It requires an awful lot of pushing. But it's not impossible, given the fact that that does represent the interests of the global majority. And this incredible thing that happened Friday at Ceuta and Melilla, this incident, you have to differentiate between an actual refugee crisis, which is also in Morocco, because a lot of the young people there don't have jobs. I mean, the living conditions in Morocco are terrible, and there are many unresolved problems going on. Maybe Morocco's not the worst case, but it's definitely not a good case of sustainability. However, you kind of have to differentiate between the absolute, knowing in a certain sense what happened in Melilla may have been instigated. There's evidence of that coming forward. And there are many reports now speaking about it being an instigation. Nevertheless, to resolve it, you have to not focus primarily on the instigation, but focus on addressing the root cause. I mean, this incident has triggered an absolute wild explosion, bringing to the forefront a lot of the underlying tensions and resentments and prejudices and schemes and so forth and so on that the Western hegemony has tried to maintain its control, has bred these conditions that are now getting out of the control of the Western hegemony. There's something coming from a spokesperson, Alexander Grushkov, who basically said it's really the Western regime change wars, which has led to this migrant crisis that's going on, obviously. And that is absolutely to the point, because the regime change wars in Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, the toppled governments, which, may not have been perfect, but were sure better than the ones that they've got now. And this has bred extremism. It basically transformed the entire region into terrorist havens, leading to migration waves like the one that just erupted. And it's kind of put the limelight on the unity of the European Union, which is really a joke, because it's now out in the open that many of the nations of the European Union fighting one another like a bunch of crows trying to hack out each other's eyes, at least from the bureaucracy side. But the obvious question is, can the European Union survive what's going on right now? And you look at Sanchez of Spain. He's become a thorn in the flesh of the EU because he has attacked the genocide in Gaza. He has honored Francesca Albanese. He didn't open the Spanish-US bases for trans flights into the Middle East. And all of this has angered Washington. It's angered Britain, to say the least. And so there's all this disruption going on inside the European Union. And I'm not going to bore you by going into how much all of this has been disrupting this balance. But, It's not just establishments that are panicking over their loss of control. And given the fact that according to international and state law and so forth, the legitimacy of these governments, especially our own, is derived from the consent of the governed. Even if that principle has been pretty much abandoned in most places. Nevertheless, they've got these upcoming elections in Germany where the AfD, the alternate for Deutschland, which is the right wing, that does not want militarization of Germany, does not want the current economic programs that are killing their industries, especially the auto industry. They are in the lead in the polls. And there's a total freak out going in Germany over this. And one of them for sure is the migrant issue, because the AfD wants to close down the borders. Imagine what that'll do. Look at what the open borders in America has done during the Biden campaign and during the Obama 8 years. 20 million now, 20 million, 30 million, something like that, of people who came across the borders who are still here, even though ICE has picked up a few. And now what's happened in Europe? In countries much smaller geographically than the United States, but still millions of a further stationing of nuclear weapons near the border of Russia. Mark Rutte has basically hinted that they're planning on stationing nuclear weapons close to the border of Russia among the countries of Finland and Lithuania, where Britain already has stationed new bombs. And the U.S. is intending to continuously modernize our weapons in Germany, in Burschel, in Germany, where we have nukes. They're already replacing the existing nukes with the new model B6112, which are supposedly tactical nukes, which is obviously lowering the level to their use in a very dangerous way. It's one thing to have ICBMs that can go halfway around the world, carrying multiple re-entry vehicles, every one of which could be carrying a 100 meg nuke, as opposed to a tactical nuke like what was used at Hiroshima or Nagasaki, of just, 15 kilotons or something like that of TNT equivalents. And so when you are on the border of Russia and you're taking missiles out that could hit anywhere in Russia, replacing them with tactical ones that would go over the border for a certain direction, like St. Petersburg or Moscow, what's Russia going to do? So the situation between Russia and Ukraine, very tense because of another reason. And that was this major terrorist attack in Moscow again here over the weekend. An explosion of a homemade bomb that killed apparently 5 people, injured 21 at a restaurant in Moscow. And some high-ranking military were seen, or their cars were seen in the area, because Moscow's mayor basically said that this was a brutal act of terror. And all of that is naturally increasing the resolve of Moscow to end this militarily, since diplomacy is completely absent. And the Russians clearly are in a state of mind of war, and they're becoming more brutal. And naturally, that's characteristic for when you're trying to finish off a war. Russia's attacks on Kyiv and all the other areas that I could list, becoming more brutal, becoming more intense, which, as I said, are signs when you're trying to finish off the war. Now, the CEO of the Russian equivalent of Amazon, you've heard about this, called Wildberries. the claims of Kyiv that her retailer online business is aiding the Russian military. Now, just think about this. They have Wildberries. They don't have Amazon in Russia. They have Wildberries. That's owned by a woman, Tatiana Kim, one of the richest people in all of Russia. And Kyiv said, well, we attacked them because they give money to the Russian military. Really. Really. And so, because of that, they went ahead and attacked Wildberry facilities. And, I mean, this thing is still active. The Russian response to this is still up in the air. And so, it's just, it's not mind-boggling to me. I mean, I think I got a grip on this. I think I understand what's going on here. Because the Epstein class is just not going to give up control of the world. But the world is kicking back harder and harder all the time. So things are getting more and more intense all the time. And I was just reading where the German auto industry, which has always been reflective of industry throughout Europe, BMW wants to close 1,000 jobs because the BM profits are falling. And then there's a letter that was written by the workers of Mercedes-Benz to Merz. And they're demanding, among other things, the keeping of the pension after 45 years of labor without cuts. What Germany wants to do is to take the pensions of auto workers who've put in 45 years and start cutting in on their pensions. Now think about that happening here. Those of you who are retired listening, and you're living on your pension, and you're living on your Social Security. And for some of you, you got a pretty decent life. And suppose the federal government were to come out, and don't think this is impossible, and lay a heavy tax on your pensions. That's what's going on in Germany. I mean, the German joblessness says you have a group, an outfit, an association, a brotherhood of hegemonists, and that I refer to, as others have referred to, as the Epstein class, because they're all in the Epstein records, who have control of the military. They have control of the media. They have control of the banks. They have control of the legal firms. They have control of almost everything that affects your lifestyle to one degree or another. And they're not going to give up that control, even to the point, I think, of seeing their kingdom burn down rather than lose control to the overwhelming population that makes up BRICS nations and the global South and the global majority, which represents 85% of the GNP of this planet. And they're getting stronger and stronger. And their answer to all of this is development. Infrastructure development in the countries that people are fleeing from because they just want a little justice and the ability to feed their children. So they have to flee to countries where they think life is going to be better. It just seems like such a simple thing to solve. But the ruling party, which is typified in the back and forth decisions, is spreading to other countries. And other countries, I mean, Harley has so many interviews a week in these other countries. Helga Zepp LaRouche is having interviews in all these other countries. And some of the people that I really like that are regulars on the Napolitano podcast are now being interviewed regularly through the Schiller Institute, kind of hand in hand. So that word is getting out development versus bombs. So I still hang on to a very fervent hope that this is going to come through. Now, as of what I was talking about in the clinic, what I do, yesterday spawned 3 new patient appointments. You know what thing we see more than anything else? Headaches and migraines. Headaches and migraines are so easy to fix. I had 20 years of headaches following high school football until I finally came under the care that I rendered back in 1991. More than 20 years of headaches were gone with my first correction. And so there's this lady that came from a brutal past, a brutal marriage, no longer involved, a wonderful marriage now. But because of the pounding that she had earlier in her life, developed some terrible migraines and headaches. And I saw her, I guess it was yesterday morning. And I had done something with her last week in the sense of trying to fix those problems. And she said, we're on the right track. The pain is leaving my head, it's leaving my neck, it's leaving my shoulders. And what I did was a very, very gentle little movement that almost seems like I'm not doing anything, just to reestablish that proper juxtaposition between the head and the neck, where the pinching of those nerves, which is the primary cause of headaches and migraines, is relieved. To sit down and talk with me about your pain costs nothing, but it has to be scheduled. 801-523-1890. 801-523-1890. Now I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to turn everything over to Lowell, who's got another fabulous show ready to go.